There is a version of the INFJ that almost no one talks about. Not the kind one. Not the patient one. Not the one who keeps giving chances. But the one who has finally had enough. And when that moment comes, they don't yell. They don't chase. They don't try to fix things anymore. They go quiet. Completely quiet. And that silence is where their real power begins. Because a fed-up INFJ doesn't break down. They break away. They stop explaining. They stop caring in the same way. They stop being available to people who never deserved their depth. And what replaces all of that is something far more powerful than anger. Clarity. Today, we're diving into the psychology of the INFJ personality type and exploring why, when pushed too far, they become emotionally untouchable. Not louder, not aggressive, but impossible to manipulate. Understanding the INFJ mind. The INFJ personality type is often described as rare, but rarity is not what defines them. Depth is. Real depth. The kind that doesn't show on the surface. The kind that operates quietly, beneath every interaction. An INFJ walks into a room, and they don't just see people. They read energy. They notice what is said, and what is carefully avoided. They notice tone, pauses, micro-expressions. They notice the mismatch between words and reality, and they don't react immediately. They observe. INFJs don't just see behavior. They see patterns forming behind behavior. They don't just hear words. They measure intention behind those words. Not in a suspicious way. In a precise way. Almost like their mind is constantly asking, does this align? Does this feel true? Does this repeat? They don't just experience relationships. They study them. Silently. Consistently. Almost like an internal analyst. Always running in the background. Every conversation becomes data. Every emotional shift becomes a signal. Every inconsistency becomes a clue. And over time, these clues form something powerful. A pattern map of the person in front of them. This is why INFJs often stay longer than they should. Because they don't just see who someone is right now. They see who they could become. They see the hidden layers. The wounds. The fears. The unresolved pain. They understand the why behind behavior. And that understanding creates compassion. Deep compassion. The kind that says, they're not acting this way for no reason. They're hurting. They're afraid. They're protecting something. So the INFJ stays. They try to help. They try to adjust. They try to meet the other person where they are. They don't give up easily. Not because they're weak, but because they see meaning where others see frustration. They see potential where others see limitation. And that's important. Because when an INFJ finally does give up, it means something very different. It means the pattern is no longer confusing. It is clear. It means the potential they once saw no longer aligns with reality. It means they've reached a conclusion. Not emotionally, but cognitively. Through repeated observation. Through silent analysis. Through undeniable evidence. And when that moment arrives, there is no chaos inside them. There is stillness. A quiet, grounded certainty. The INFJ breaking point. Here's what most people misunderstand. INFJs don't break suddenly. They awaken slowly. Their breaking point is not a single moment. It's a series of realizations, stacked over time. At first, they turn inward. They question themselves. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I misunderstood. They give the benefit of the doubt. Again and again. Because they value fairness. They value understanding. They don't want to misjudge. So they stay. They try again. They communicate more clearly. They soften their approach. They adjust their expectations. They become more patient, more flexible, more forgiving. But something interesting happens. Each time something feels off, they don't ignore it completely. They register it. Quietly. They store it. Not in a reactive way. In a reflective way. Almost like placing a file into a mental archive. This felt wrong. This didn't align. This repeated. And as time goes on, those files begin to connect. Dots start forming lines. Lines start forming patterns. And patterns create meaning. The INFJ may still appear calm on the outside, but internally, they are building a complete psychological picture, one that becomes harder and harder to deny, until one day, there is a shift. Not emotional, not explosive, clear, precise, final. Everything clicks. The confusion disappears. The doubt dissolves. The emotional fog lifts. And in its place is understanding. They see the person clearly. They see the dynamic clearly. They see the outcome clearly. And once they see it, they cannot unsee it. This is the true INFJ breaking point. Not a breakdown, a realization. And that realization changes everything. Reason 1, they see through manipulation instantly. A narcissistic dynamic survives on distortion, on shifting narratives, on bending reality just enough to create doubt. Blame moves. Stories change. Emotions are used as tools. And for a while, this can work. Because the INFJ is trying to understand, trying to be fair, trying to see both sides. But once they reach their limit, that openness transforms into clarity. They stop second-guessing themselves. They stop overriding their intuition. And suddenly, everything sharpens. Every inconsistency stands out. Every contradiction becomes obvious. Every emotional tactic becomes visible. It's like a lens comes into focus. What once felt confusing, now feels predictable. And this is where the power shifts. Because manipulation needs uncertainty. It needs emotional reaction. It needs the other person to stay unsure. But a fed-up INFJ is no longer unsure. They don't need to argue. They don't need to prove anything. They see it. And seeing it is enough. Their awareness becomes a shield. Quiet, stable, unbreakable. Reason 2, the INFJ door slam is final. The INFJ door slam is often described as sudden. But in reality, it is the most gradual decision they ever make. It just looks sudden from the outside. Because all the processing happened internally, long before the action. By the time an INFJ closes the door, they've already walked through every possibility. They've revisited conversations. They've reanalyzed intentions. They've considered outcomes. Again and again. They've given chances. Multiple chances. They've communicated clearly. They've tried to repair. They've tried to understand. They've stayed past the point where most people would have left. So when the door finally closes, it is not emotional. It is resolved. There is no inner conflict left. No lingering what if. No need for one more conversation. Because in their mind, the conclusion has already been reached. The door slam is not an explosion. It is an ending. Clean, quiet, absolute. And that finality is what makes it so powerful. Reason 3, they stop explaining. INFJs are naturally wired to explain. They want mutual understanding. They want emotional clarity. They want both sides to feel seen. So they speak. They clarify. They rephrase. They try again. But when they reach their limit, something shifts. They realize that communication is not the problem. Willingness is. You can explain something perfectly. But if the other person is not open, nothing will land. And once the INFJ understands this, they stop. Not out of frustration. Out of awareness. They conserve their energy. They withdraw their effort. They choose silence. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they finally understand who is not willing to hear it. And that silence holds more truth than any explanation ever could. Reason 4, emotional detachment replaces empathy. Empathy is one of the INFJ's strongest traits. They feel deeply. They absorb emotions. They connect on a level that most people don't reach. But empathy without boundaries becomes exhaustion. And once the INFJ reaches that exhaustion point, they adapt. They don't lose empathy. They redirect it. They become selective, intentional, protective of their emotional energy. They begin to ask a new question. Not just, what does this person feel? But, is this connection healthy for me? And that question changes everything. Because now, empathy is no longer automatic. It is earned. And where it is not reciprocated, it is withdrawn. This emotional detachment is not coldness. It is intelligence. It is balance. It is self-preservation. Reason 5. They no longer feel responsible for you. For a long time, INFJs carry emotional weight that isn't theirs. They feel responsible for how others feel. They want to ease pain, fix problems, create harmony. They step into roles that were never truly theirs to carry. And eventually, this becomes too heavy. At their breaking point, they see something clearly. Helping is a choice, not an obligation. And more importantly, you cannot help someone who does not want to change. This realization is freeing, deeply freeing, because it removes a burden they've carried for far too long. They stop overextending. They stop overgiving. They stop trying to rescue people from themselves. And in that space, they reclaim something essential. Their own energy. Their own peace. Their own life. No guilt. No overthinking. No emotional chains. Just clarity. And release. Reason 6. Their memory becomes precision. INFJs don't remember everything. They remember what matters. Not just events, but emotional imprints. How something felt, what was said, and what was avoided. The subtle shift in tone. The moment something didn't align. At first, these memories sit quietly, in the background, not demanding attention, but never fully disappearing. And over time, they begin to organize themselves. Patterns emerge. Connections form. Meaning develops. So when an INFJ reaches their limit, they are not reacting to one incident. They are responding to a timeline, a sequence, a consistent pattern of behavior that has repeated, in different forms. This gives their decision a kind of precision. It is not exaggerated. It is not distorted. It is grounded, clear, evidence-based, in an emotional and psychological sense. And this is why, when they finally step away, there is no confusion left inside them. Their memory has already done the work. Quietly, thoroughly, completely. Reason 7. They stop seeking approval. INFJs, for a long time, seek harmony. And sometimes, that turns into seeking approval. Not in an obvious way, but in a subtle, internal way. They want things to feel right, balanced, mutually understood. So they adjust. They soften. They meet others halfway, even when the other person isn't moving at all. But when they reach their limit, this pattern breaks. They begin to see something clearly. Not everyone is capable of understanding you. And more importantly, not everyone is meant to. This realization shifts their focus inward. They stop asking, "Do they understand me?" and start asking, "Do I understand myself? Do I trust what I see? Do I trust what I feel?" And once that trust is established, external validation loses its grip. They no longer need agreement to feel certain. They no longer need approval to feel grounded. They become internally aligned. And that alignment makes them incredibly difficult to influence. Reason 8. They become strategically detached. INFJs are not impulsive by nature. They don't jump into decisions. They build toward them. Slowly, carefully, thoughtfully. So when they decide to detach, it doesn't happen in chaos. It happens with structure. They begin preparing internally. They reduce emotional investment. They observe more and react less. They start creating space. Mentally first, then emotionally, and eventually, physically. From the outside, it may look like they're still present, still engaged. But internally, they are already stepping away, piece by piece, layer by layer, until the connection no longer holds the same weight. And when the final moment comes, it feels almost effortless, because the detachment has already been completed within them. This is not avoidance. This is strategy. A quiet, intelligent withdrawal of energy. Reason 9. They refuse to engage in toxic cycles. Toxic dynamics rely on repetition. The same argument, the same misunderstanding, the same emotional loop, over and over again. Most people get pulled into these cycles. They react. They defend. They try to fix the situation again. But a fed-up INFJ recognizes the pattern. And once they recognize it, they step out of it completely. They stop responding in predictable ways. They stop feeding the cycle with emotion. They stop participating. And without participation, the cycle collapses. There is nothing to sustain it. No reaction to trigger. No energy to pull from. Just stillness. And in that stillness, the dynamic loses its power. This is one of the most underestimated forms of strength. Not fighting. Not resisting. Simply refusing to engage. Reason 10. They rebuild themselves from within. When an INFJ steps away, they don't immediately move on. They reflect deeply. They revisit the experience. Not to reopen wounds, but to understand them. What did I miss? What did I ignore? What will I do differently next time? This reflection is not self-blame. It's self-development. They extract meaning from the experience. They refine their awareness. They strengthen their intuition. And slowly, they rebuild themselves. Stronger, clearer, more aligned. They reconnect with their own needs, their own values, their own boundaries. And this version of the INFJ is not the same as before. They are not as easily pulled into unhealthy dynamics. They are not as quick to overlook red flags. They are not as willing to overextend. They have evolved. And that evolution is permanent. Reason 11. Their boundaries become unshakable. Before reaching their limit, INFJs often struggle with boundaries. Not because they don't understand them, but because they prioritize harmony. They don't want conflict. They don't want to hurt others. So they bend. They adjust. They allow more than they should. But after the breaking point, this changes completely. They realize that without boundaries, there is no real peace. Only exhaustion. So they begin to set limits. Clear limits. Not aggressive. Not reactive. Just firm. And most importantly, consistent. They no longer explain their boundaries endlessly. They no longer negotiate their core needs. They simply state them. And stand by them. And if those boundaries are not respected, they don't argue. They distance themselves. Quietly. Because they now understand something deeply. Access to them is a privilege, not a guarantee. Reason 12. They move forward without looking back. This is the final transformation. And often, the most misunderstood. When an INFJ is truly done, they don't circle back. They don't check in. They don't reopen conversations. Not because they don't care, but because they've already processed everything. Fully. They've felt it, analyzed it, understood it, and released it. So when they move forward, they do it with intention. They focus on growth, on peace, on building a life that aligns with who they truly are. There is no need to revisit the past, because the past has already served its purpose. It taught them, it shaped them, it refined them, and now, they are moving beyond it, with clarity, with strength, with quiet confidence. And once they reach this stage, there is no return to who they used to be. Only forward movement. Only evolution. A narcissistic mindset depends on control, on reaction, on emotional access. But a fed-up NFJ removes all of those things. They don't fight for control. They step out of the game entirely. They don't seek validation. They validate themselves. They don't chase closure. They create it internally. And in doing so, they become something rare. Not dangerous in a destructive way, but powerful in a psychological way. Calm, clear, unreachable by manipulation. Because the greatest strength of the INFJ is not their empathy, it's their awareness. And once that awareness becomes fully aligned, their mind becomes exactly what it was meant to be. Their greatest power.